Hello, friends. Welcome back to my channel. I'm Elliot Parker, and whether you're a writer, a reader, or just a lover of words, I invite you to stop what you're doing and join me for a page break. I'm so excited to have debut author Alex Kenna on with us today. She's taking a page break with us today, and we're talking to her about this brand new book, her brand new thriller. It's called What Meets the Eye. It is a terrific, terrific book, and I'm so excited to have her on the program to talk about it, to talk to her about her inspirations for it, and also to find out how her career does or does not impact her writing life and her impact and not impact, or maybe not impact this book and maybe future projects that she has coming down the pike. So we're going to talk about that in just a few minutes. But I wanted to remind you, if you are brand new to our channel, welcome. We're glad to have you. Please go over here to the right-hand side of the screen and click the subscribe button and make us a part of your regular YouTube watching system and platforms. If you're watching us on Instagram, please be sure and like the video and also leave any comments or questions for us in the comments fields. And we'll be sure to get those questions to Alex and get some answers for you about that as well. Also remind you to leave comments over on YouTube as well, down in the comments fields. If you have any questions or comments about anything we talk about related to Alex's career as a writer and also her brand new book, please be sure and leave those, and we'll be sure and pass that information along as well. So she's taking a page break with us today. This is her debut book. She is a prosecutor. She is also an avid Sunday painter, which we're going to find out more about a little bit later on. She lives in Los Angeles with her husband, her son, and a giant schnauzer. And again, this is the title of her brand new book, What Meets the Eye. It's an electric thriller. It's a polished thriller. This debut thriller really deals with a lot of everything associated with unbridled ambition, themes of greed, themes of the quest for revenge and seeking out revenge. So, Alex, thanks for taking a page break with us today. Good to have you on the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
I wanted to ask you first, before we get into the book specifically, your career as a prosecutor in that line of work, how does that influence your writing life, or does it influence your writing life at all? How do you kind of mesh those two together, the career that you have as a prosecutor with also kind of this second career that you started as a writer?
Yeah, well, I mean, it didn't have a direct connection, like in terms of writing about anything work related, but I think it's one of the reasons I was interested in writing about crime fiction, just because I have a background in criminal law, and in some ways it was a challenge because I felt I originally set this as a police procedural. My main character was originally a police officer, and I felt like I was, as a prosecutor, I was both too close and not close enough to that world, where I felt like I either knew too much about police work, where I would start knowing what I was getting wrong, and that would be a distraction, or I didn't know enough. So that kind of took me in a different direction, and I kind of ended up writing a former police officer PI who was kind of cop adjacent. So I think that's definitely one way that it affected it. And I think also just, being a trial lawyer, we think a lot about presenting evidence, how to keep a jury engaged. There's definitely a storytelling component to that, which in a very different way, I think, affects my writing.
Do you have any thoughts on why we see so many great thrillers and great crime fiction novels set in LA, specifically sort of around the LAPD, the Los Angeles Police Department? I mean, we have your book that's kind of related and connected to the LAPD. We've got Michael Connelly, certainly his fantastic Harry Bosch series is connected there. There's a Rick Cahill series that Matt Coyle has done, where Rick is a former LAPD detective, LAPD homicide detective that's kind of run afoul of the department and is now sort of on the outside, on the fringes, working as a private investigator. Do you have any thoughts on why we see so many writers, when they're trying to set a story or set some kind of a fragmented hero or a jaded hero sort of working inside and outside the department, why they always seem to pick LA and the LAPD?
Yeah, I'm not sure about the LAPD. I think, but in terms of LA, I think it's partly just that this is a weird place, and it's a weird place where anything that you want story wise, it probably exists here. I mean, there's weirdos here of every different stripe. There's extreme wealth. There's extreme poverty. There's a lot of crime. I think LA is an interesting place in and of itself. A lot of people talk about how it's kind of hard to define it. It's hard to because just depending on what story you want to tell, or depending on where you live, what perspective you're coming from, LA is totally different. So in some, it's got a ton to offer, but it's also in some ways kind of a blank canvas. And I think there's something kind of attractive about the combination of beautiful scenery, perfect weather, and palm trees, ocean, and then also kind of a dark, like seedy side. And I think for some reason that combination is very attractive to people.
Yeah, well said. Well said. I've just always been curious of that, why we see so many set there. But yeah, all of those points make really good sense. Well, you give us a great connection and a great character who has some ties to the LAPD, but is sort of branching out on her own, and that is Kate Myers. And I wanted to read a quote about her. She is a former officer with LAPD, and now she's working as a private investigator. And there was one quote that she says early on in the book that I wrote down, and I think it really kind of defines who she is. And I'll have you give us some context behind this quote and what this lets us know as readers about her character. And she says, "And frankly, I'm competent despite my shortcomings. I'm a better than average PI. In another life, I was a damn good detective." Tell us a little bit about that quote and what that tells us about Kate Myers as we meet her in the story.
Sure. It's Kate Miles, but
Excuse me,
not
Kate
that
Miles. Thank you.
worries. So basically, when I set up to write her, I was interested in writing a character who had gone through something that was a seismic life shift that kind of changed where they saw themselves in the world, and changed, changed her sense of identity in some ways. So for Kate, she had been a homicide detective. She had a catastrophic accident on the job and ended up getting addicted to pain pills. And then from there, she ended up not being able to work as a police officer anymore, and then losing custody other than every other weekend of her daughter. So for her, she's where the book picks up, she's sort of trying to claw herself back to a sense of normal. And she's hung up a shingle. She started a PI firm, but she obviously still has a long way to go in terms of healing herself. So I wanted to write her as a character who'd made a lot of mistakes, a character who's had a lot of things that happened to her, and was definitely deeply flawed, but also who had a really strong core. But I was also kind of interested in having someone who had a really strong core, but who didn't necessarily realize that, and who I think it's probably fair to say that she hates herself a little bit when the book picks up, hasn't really given herself for some of the places that she's gone. And I wanted to give her room to kind of rebuild a life and kind of improve herself. So she's very intelligent. She also has flaming ADHD, which is probably because I have flaming ADHD, so it made it a little easier to write her as a character. So she's a little scattered, a little disorganized, but she's very intelligent, and she's kind of rebuilding herself as a private detective.
Very good. One of the things I loved about your story is how time shifts between the chapters, and sometimes we have shifts that are days back and forth, sometimes it's months back and forth, and we also get sort of multiple narrators as those time shifts take place. And I just thought it was so well done, and it was such an easy sort of path to follow as the narrative unfolds. And I wanted to ask you about writing that, how difficult that was to write that, and did you set out to kind of have these shifting timelines and these multiple narrators, or was this something that as you were drafting and revising the story, you thought, I need to add this in order to give it a little bit of extra pizzazz? Can you talk about using that as a technique in your story and in your book?
Yeah, it definitely started out in different timelines. And then I think you asked me a little bit earlier about just being a trial lawyer and how that played in. And I think thinking about how to present evidence in a more dynamic way, I think probably factored into that. I didn't want to write a book where it was just the sleuth going from place to place, interviewing people about something that happened. I thought it was to me, it was more compelling to bring some of these characters to life, to have things happen in the first person. And with Margot, my victim, she was a famous artist who definitely has a dark side, is a little bit off the rails sometimes, but also has some redeeming qualities. I didn't want to just have a victim who was a quote unquote crazy, dead, beautiful, talented woman, and make her kind of like a manic pixie dream girl. I felt like she really deserved to be more fully fleshed out. And so going back in time allowed me to have some chapters from Margot's perspective, and to kind of tell her story, give her a sense of her as a whole human being. And it also allowed me to kind of explore some themes about the art world by taking things from early in her career. I could talk about things that happened in art school. I could talk about things that happened when she was a brand new artist. And, early on in her career, she was, kind of relying on sexual currency in a way that she probably wouldn't have had to if she'd gotten her start 10 years later, I think. So I think just shifting around in time allowed me to kind of explore more themes in terms of the art world, and also just bring some more dimensions to some of the characters where I don't think that I could have done that if everything was just in the present tense.
Yeah. And you mentioned we talked about Kate a minute ago, and I wanted to ask you a little bit about her, because she is sort of the, as you were talking about the things that have happened to her, being addicted to pain pills, and she's lost custody of her daughter. You know, she's very much kind of that flawed protagonist that we see a lot of in crime fiction. But one of the things I liked about her is I felt like when we were reading the story, and I knew that story about her and what had happened to her early on, I never really felt like, you know, that her flaws always stuck into my mind. I mean, she felt to me very real. She felt to me like somebody who might live in my neighborhood, who just might happen to be a police officer, a former police officer, or someone who is a relative or friend of mine who's gone through a lot of trauma like she's gone through. And I really loved that part of how you developed her. And I also love how you kind of put her in contrast to her former ex-partner, Ron Bennett. And I really liked him as a character. And you talk about the investigation of Miss Starling, which is just she's a fascinating character, and her family and all those people that kind of flutter in and out of her life and in her sphere of influence are great too. But I really loved kind of the contrast and similarity between Kate and Ron Bennett. Can you talk about him as a character, developing him, and what kind of relationship he and Kate have now as compared to maybe what it was like when she was on the force?
Sure. I just want to. So there's Ron Bennett's kind of like the bad cop, and Luke is the good cop. Do you mean Luke or?
Yeah, well, Luke and Ron, and kind of how all three of them really kind of interact and kind of work in and around each other.
Yeah, Luke is her former partner. Where I had written it so that they were in the car together for a while. She was married, he had a fiance, and it was kind of one of those workplace sexually tense friendships where there's a lot of subtext and nobody's really talking about it. And then when she meets him again, he's kind of been relegated to a fraud section, which is not his first choice, and he's a little bit bitter for his own reasons. And he's now he's not attached. Now she's not attached, and she's not really sure whether you know the interest was all on her side or if it's mutual. And they kind of do a bit of a song and dance around each other. And so, yeah, that was something I was interested in exploring. I don't want to give anything away, so I don't want to talk too much about that. But I definitely wanted her to have a love interest, but I also didn't think that she was emotionally in a place where a lot was necessarily going to happen. I think she's probably not quite ready for that just after she's gone through everything. And then there's kind of a less savory character who's also on the police force. There's Ron Bennett, who is I was interested in. I didn't really want to write something where, you know, all the police characters were either good or bad. I think, you know, obviously in the real world there are good people, there are bad people in any profession, and I wanted to bring some balance to that. So I thought that was important. And Bennett was he was fun to write. He was very loosely inspired by somebody who I kind of tangentially knew, who you know, talked a big game about, you know, working really hard and had a lot of bravado, but, you know, also had some ego issues that were you know, rather in the forefront. So yeah, he was definitely a fun character to write.
Yeah, and I just love how I felt like Luke on one hand and Ron Bennett on the other hand were kind of both sides of Kate's personality. Like, you know, the true goodness of Kate, but also the Kate that, you know, is frustrated and kind of just not real happy with what's happened to her and kind of how she's been off the force, and he kind of represented to me that sort of surly side that we all have to our personalities, but maybe that Kate would have as well as a result of everything that's happened to her. And one of the things I found so interesting about your book too is all of this about art and paintings and galleries and all of this. Did you have to do a lot of research about that? I felt like I learned a lot about how all this works by reading your book, and I'm wondering, did you have to do a lot of research on that, or did you just have, you know, connections in that world? How did you get all of that worked into the story? Because it's done so well, and I've learned a lot, but I don't think it slowed down the story in any way.
Well, a lot of it, a lot of it was from my background. Because before law school, I studied art and art history in college, and then I you know, I paint on the side. And I worked in a gallery very briefly when I was in my early 20s, before the Great Recession hit, and that was no longer a viable professional option at the time. And then, I interned in several museums. So one of the reasons I wanted to set in the art world was I felt like I had some experiences that I could bring to the table. Like there's the vast majority of my art professors were wonderful, but obviously not everybody was wonderful. And there's a sadistic art professor in one chapter in the book who was kind of loosely inspired by two people who I had been taught. And I think, in terms of Margot's influences, it was important for me to think about who Margot would be looking at in her own art. Because Margot's art, she kind of blurs the line between art and life and crime a little bit, which plays a role in the book. And so it was important for me to think about what artists she would have been looking at. And that was, I didn't have to do that much research for it, just because I've been obsessed with contemporary art for so long. I kind of, thought, well, who would she be looking at, based on my knowledge and who I knew. But I did have to do more research kind of on the business side of things, in terms of when going into there's an art forgery angle. I don't think it's giving anything away to say that, some after Margot dies, some paintings that are being sold as Margot originals start cropping up in the market. And I did have to do some more research in terms of that. So that was pretty fun. I got to go down some nerdy wormholes.
Very good. And the book we're talking about is this one right here. It is called What Meets the Eye. Taking a page break with us today is Alex Kenna. She's the author of this debut thriller, which is so good, and you're going to just absolutely love it. And I hope you add it to your to-be-read pile if you haven't read it already. So we're going to come back and talk about the book, Alex, in just a few seconds. But I wanted to put you on the hot seat, the author hot seat that we always do on every program, to kind of give our audience an opportunity to get to know you just a little bit more, as a writer, but maybe also as a person. So are you ready to be put on the hot seat?
All right, I'm ready.
Okay. So first question is, what do you wish people knew about the law career or attorneys that they don't know? Because I feel like most people's exposure to attorneys are what we see on Law and Order or CSI or some show like that, but you work in it every day. What's something you wish people knew about the field of law or lawyers in general that maybe they don't know?
Well, we're not all horrible, so that's I'm gonna add that. I think most lawyers are doing their best to do the right thing, trying to be ethical. I think most lawyers actually focus very strongly on that side of things, and in contrast to the way we tend to be portrayed.
Very good, very good. What is your perfect relaxing evening?
Getting a babysitter. I had a babysitter last night for the first time in like 2 years, and we went out to a restaurant that didn't have a kids menu and ordered a bottle of wine. If I could just duplicate that on a weekly basis, I'd be a happy girl.
Very good. What's your favorite food?
All things cheese.
Very good. Macaroni and cheese. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. What is your favorite color?
Green and turquoise.
Okay. If you had to vacation in one or two of these places, where would you go? The mountains or the beach?
Well, I live in the mountains, so I'm gonna have to go for the beach.
Fair enough. Fair enough. What is an author or a book, or who is an author, or what is a book that you think everybody should be reading right now?
Everybody should be reading right now. Everybody should be reading right now. Maybe My Brilliant Friend, only because I've recently started the sequel and I forgot how incredible the first one was, which is the sequel's brought me back to. But I think, yeah, My Brilliant Friend is a wonderful book. I think everyone should read that.
What's the hardest part about writing that maybe most people who haven't written don't understand?
Making sure that everything hangs together. And then treating the book as a whole and not rewriting the first chapter over and over and over and over and over again.
If you couldn't be work in art, and you couldn't be an attorney, and you couldn't be a writer, what would you do?
Well, I'd love to go back to school and get a PhD in art history.
Awesome.
Maybe go become a professor.
Very, very good. Very, very good. Okay. And my last question is, how much attention does your giant schnauzer get in your house between you, your husband, your child, and your dog. How much attention does the schnauzer require from you all every day?
Oh, she rules the roost. Yeah, she insists on getting in the bed every night. She likes to lay across all the pillows, and we have to physically reposition her so we can get in the bed too. But she's definitely the queen of the castle.
Fair enough. Well, thank you so much, Alex, for being on the hot seat with us, and you're off the hot seat now, so we'll come back to talking about your book. But thanks for that. Thanks for those honest responses, and hope that gives our audience just an opportunity to learn a little bit more about you and your interests and hobbies, maybe outside of writing and your legal career. And the title of the book that we are talking about, that is it right here. What Meets the Eye. Our guest is Alex Kenna. So, Alex, I wanted to go back to the book and talk a little bit more about it with you, because so much we can get into, and I wish we had more time to get into all of it. But one of the things I also loved about this book is there was a second murder that kind of popped up and caught me by surprise. And I don't want to have you give anything away, but Jason Martinez is another artist who we find involved in this world of sort of shady, or the shady side of this world of art dealing. So who is he briefly, and what does this do to Kate's investigation once he's found dead?
Yeah, so he was another artist who's kind of we went to art school with Margot, and he basically Kate goes to a gallery and she realizes that there are some shady looking Martinez's, and it kind of starts making her take this art forgery angle a little bit more seriously. But one of the things I wanted to do with him is I wanted to have kind of a nicer character from the art world to balance things out, because I didn't want everybody to be a monster. And Margot's not. I like Margot. I have a soft spot for her, but she's not the most sympathetic character. Her gallerist is not sympathetic at all. And I wanted somebody who was more sympathetic. And for Jason, he was somebody who was really struggling, and he kind of went down a dark path when things were not working out for him in the market. And I wanted to have him kind of just show how a person can be affected by just these kind of brutal market forces, and how hard it is for a person to try to make their craft, even just trying to find a way to working a minimum wage job and finding a way to pay student loans and buy art supplies, which I don't think people realize how expensive they are, in just if you're not in that world. I mean, just buying oil paint, it can be hundreds of dollars, and your artists don't make a lot of money. So I wanted him to be kind of a sympathetic foil, so people didn't come away thinking everybody involved in the art world is a horrible person.
Yeah, very well said. Two themes that really popped up, and I wrote these themes down a lot when I was reviewing your book prior to our interview. I felt like that ambition and revenge are two themes that keep bubbling up as the story unfolds, and not just ambition and revenge, but what happens if they go unrestrained or unchecked, or there's nobody there to kind of say, to rein someone in, or to rein a group in who feels like these are kind of their ultimate goals. What are your thoughts on that as themes, maybe not only in your book, but maybe as societal themes in general, this idea of ambition and this idea of revenge, and maybe how it plays in your book specifically, but maybe in a broader perspective, that those themes, which I just feel like in crime fiction and elsewhere, are always just such rich places to develop and to create plot and conflict. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think for ambition, I think a lot of it factored, and I think ambition was a little bit different for Margot and Jason. I think Jason, he's somebody who's interested in, he's very, very sincere. He makes these realistic paintings of, people from his community. And I think he didn't get taken seriously until later in his career, in part because the world kind of caught up and realized that they should, pay attention to different voices. And so, for him, ambition was, it was very sincere. He had a real message to tell, and he wanted to get it out there. So I don't think there's a twisted side to it for him. Margot is a little bit of a different story. I think she was very ambitious to succeed. She was brilliant. And that, she was kind of willing to do whatever it would take. And that's where things started getting twisted, where, in the beginning, when she was really young, she kind of used sexual currency in a little bit, in a way, then that was less necessary when she was more successful in her 30s. And the market kind of turned away from an interest in shock art and became more interested in art with a message. Then, she sort of started thinking about things from that perspective, but that also got twisted. And so, that was definitely a factor for her. I wasn't trying to, I wasn't trying to say that she was killed because she was ambitious. I really didn't have any kind of, sexist, woman striving gets her comeuppance or anything like that. But I think that was it was one factor of what it takes to be successful in this world. That was also harmful for her in some ways. And then I think for revenge, that was definitely something on Margot's mind for reasons that I won't totally get into. But I think for her, those two factors kind of combined, and in a way that got kind of twisted and sinister. And she was interested in kind of this idea of like when art meets life, which a lot of artists were kind of involved in, who she'd been looking at, where one of her big influences is this incredible French artist who's Sophie Calle, who did a piece where she got dumped by email, and she basically took the email and she gave it to all these different women who were experts in their fields to analyze it. Like there was a grammarian who talked about how his grammar was terrible, and ethicist to talk about how he's a cad. And she kind of combined life and revenge a little bit, and art. And I wanted to take that idea for Margot and kind of combine, an interest in revenge and an interest in life, and also ambition, obviously, to be successful, but also add kind of a criminal side of it, to show how things, if you push things too much, things can kind of go in a really dark direction. But yeah, I think it's definitely ambition and revenge can go in a dark direction, both in art and life. And I think it's probably especially pertinent in the arts, just because it's such a brutal market, and there's so much talent, and it's so hard to make a living in an artistic and in a creative sphere. And I don't think it's getting any easier for anyone. So I think that when you throw in the difficulties, it can definitely take ambition in a dark direction.
Yeah, very good. And I wanted to ask you a sort of a stylistic question, because one of the things I loved about your book is that you really keep the pages turning. I mean, we go from one chapter to the next, and we get to the end of one chapter, and I'm ready to go into the next one. I can't wait to get to the next chapter. I don't want to put the book down. How did you do that, and how difficult is it to do that? I mean, we know that crime fiction kind of leans towards that, or should lean towards that, but I wanted to ask you about that. And was that easy, difficult for you? Is it something that you consciously sort of were keeping in your mind as you were drafting, thinking, okay, I've got to have something here to keep the page turning into the next chapter? Okay, that process, how does all that come together? How did it work for you in terms of creating this book, which is just such a wonderful page turner that once you get into it, you just won't want to put it down?
I think part of it is I came to crime fiction pretty late in terms of reading, but I watched a lot of thrillers. So I've heard a lot of writers talk about that and critics having a similar experience. Like I was completely addicted to like TV police dramas, thrillers, movie thrillers, and I read a lot of true crime. And for whatever reason, like it seems completely obvious that if you like movie thrillers and true crime, you would probably like reading crime fiction. But I didn't make that tiny connection until my 30s. But I think probably because when I think about crime fiction, my brain kind of unconsciously thinks about a TV pacing. I think that kind of factored into my writing. And if anything, I think it's been I've tried to kind of slow it down a little bit. And for when I was first sort of trying to teach myself how to write, I would try to read writers who wrote very differently from me. Like I read a lot of Tana French, who's brilliant and really descriptive, because I don't naturally write. I'm not naturally very descriptive. I kind of just am a lot more plot focused, I think. And I wanted to kind of make myself kind of more do the opposite, kind of slow down a little bit. And I'm trying to do that a little bit more with the sequel that I've been working on, adding a little bit more description, and maybe taking a pace, taste to breathe. But definitely, I think just the way that feels natural is to write things that it's more fast paced, and to kind of switch up things with different characters, different scenes. And I think it's what keeps me engaged, and what does it for me in terms of as a reader. So it's kind of just where my brain wants to go as a writer.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you also sort of a final question as we finish up here about Kate Miles, because one of my questions was going to be, are we going to see Kate in the future? And I'm so happy to hear that we are, and that there's another sequel coming, because I really think readers are going to fall in love with her from the very first pages as we meet her for the first time. But when I finished your book, I kind of kept thinking, for Kate, I was sort of putting myself in her shoes. why does she keep doing this? Why does she put herself through this? Why did she not just, I know she had the disability at the beginning, and we won't get into all of that to spoil it for the reader, but that led her to sort of leaving the force and starting this next career, and the painkillers and all of that. But I kept thinking to myself, especially at the end, I thought, why is poor Kate putting herself through this? And obviously she's coming back for a sequel. What is it about her character? What is it about her introspectively that makes her keep doing this, keep not only fighting through the personal and physical challenges that she has, but keep dealing with people like Ron Bennett and Jason Martinez and all these other people we've talked about? What makes her keep going and keep at this, as opposed to just saying, you know what, I'm done. I've solved this last case, I'm done, I'm walking away?
Yeah, I think for her, it's kind of a calling. I thought about when I was writing her, even though she's not a police officer anymore, I thought about a lot of some of the incredible female police officers who I met when I was a DA. Where I think for her, it's really a calling, trying to, bring justice. I think it's also, to some degree, I think there's a little bit of being an adrenaline junkie. And I think in her new life as a PI, I think she doesn't get fascinating cases that often. So, obviously I'm not going to write a book about where she's like, trying to catch an insurance cheat, because that wouldn't be the most thrilling. But realistically, I think she probably does a lot of cases that are kind of boring. And every once in a while, something comes on that's really juicy and reminds her of when she was on the force, and kind of lets her do something that has more meaning. So I think it's a little bit of an addiction. She definitely has a self-destructive streak. I think she struggles with that because she's also, she's a good mother and she wants to regain custody of her kid. But I think she definitely has a little bit of an adrenaline junkie and self-destructive streak in her that kind of keeps her going.
All right. And as we finish up, my last question for you, Alex, today on Page Break: if anyone wants to get in contact with you to follow your career as a writer and where things are going and stay updated with the sequel, or if they want to get copies of What Meets the Eye, how can they reach out to you? How can they stay in contact with you directly, first of all? And then where can they get copies of your book?
Yeah, you can get my copies of my book on Amazon or through Barnes and Noble. It's at a lot of local bookshops. So you can definitely order it through your local bookstore. You can order it on Amazon. Hope you will. And if you want to get in contact with me, I'm on Twitter a lot. Just Alex Kenna 9. I have a website, alexkenna.com, which is terrible because I built it myself and I have no computer skills, but it does exist. And you can always email me. It's just a.kenna@hotmail, because everything on Gmail was taken. But yeah, feel free to get in touch.
What Meets the Eye is the debut thriller by our guest today that's been taking a page break with us. Her name is Alex Kenna. Folks, this is everything you're going to expect from a thriller, everything you're going to expect from crime fiction. It's twisty, it's absorbing. We've got a wonderful character in Kate Miles that, again, you're going to just love her from the very first pages. We've got all kinds of nefarious things going on with seedy people doing bad things for difficult reasons. And it's a terrific book. It is a book that I'm telling you, once you get started, you better be sure you've set aside several hours, because you're not going to want to put it down until you get to the very last page. So, Alex, congratulations on the book. We're so happy for you. And when you get that sequel out and into the world, come back onto Page Break. We'll take another page break with you and talk about it. So congratulations and thanks so much.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
We also want to remind you to subscribe to the channel, leave us some comments and feedback in the comments section below. If you're watching us on Instagram, please do the same, like the video, leave some comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this book and on the Page Break channel as well. So that'll do it for us this time, but stay well and see you someplace soon, I hope.